Hello and welcome. My name is Hazel Thompson, and I'm your host of Beyond the Story podcast. This podcast is to highlight the incredible stories of people around the world that I've had the privilege to journey alongside as a photojournalist and filmmaker, often in hostile environments and war-torn countries. Together, we'll be focusing on key justice and humanitarian issues affecting the world today, hearing directly from the individuals behind the headlines and their journey beyond the story. I hope as listeners that you will be inspired by the transformational strength of my guests. Come and join me on this journey and hear the first-hand experiences of ordinary people surviving the extraordinary and the transformational power of hope in not only surviving, but thriving beyond the story. Hello and welcome to Beyond the Story podcast. Now, before we get started on the series, I've invited my lovely executive producer, Nancy Fraser, to come and have a chat about what is the inspiration behind the podcast and what listeners should be expecting. So, hello, Nancy.
Hi, Hazel. So, look, I'm going to kick straight off with, why have you chosen to do a podcast?
Well, I am an avid podcast listener and I've wanted to do a podcast for a while, actually. But I think the main reason is over my career, I have met some incredible individuals with some very inspiring stories. So I thought, what a great opportunity to create a podcast, to kind of go behind the scenes in my work, to share with my listeners the stories I told when I met them for the first time, but where they are now and the journey they've been on since I've told their story.
So not everyone will know that Hazel is actually a multi-award-winning British photojournalist and filmmaker, and for 20 years she's travelled all around the world. Tell us a little bit about your career, Hazel. It's an extraordinary story and obviously inspires what you're about to do with this podcast.
Well, I've been really lucky. I started my career firstly as a photojournalist. I call myself a visual storyteller, but I started off just doing stills. And I started my career at a local newspaper when I was just 18 years old and really haven't looked back since. So my roots are right in the heart of journalism. I used to work for a publication called the Croydon Advertiser. We had about 14 editions and I travel all over the south and southeast of London. And I did that for a number of years. And then I started working for the Nationals and then started working for the international publications. And then over the years, as technology went forward and cameras improved, when the DSLR cameras came out and we were able to start filming on them, I started getting into filmmaking as well. So for the last kind of 12 years, I've been also making short films. So that's been my journey. And the privilege as a journalist, I have been very lucky to travel across the world doing what I do, being sent on assignment. And I've pretty much done that from the very start of my career. And I've actually got to travel with work to over 65 countries. I have covered stories in hostile environments, like the red light districts in India, to Cambodia, to over in the US, looking at conflict and the consequences on women and children in war-torn countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, Central African Republic, and even just domestic stories here in the UK, looking at the issue of homelessness. I've just recently directed a series on that, and runaway children. So it's very diverse. And just doing what I call standard journalism, where I'll get a call from a picture desk and cover the royal wedding. So it's very diverse in the work I do.
I mean, you've worked for New York Times, Guardian, Observer, Stern Magazine, Channel 4 News, so many different outlets. So love the title. We love the title, Beyond the Story. Tell us a little bit about that. What's behind it? How did you come up with it?
It really is about waypoints. As a journalist, I have the privilege to meet people at the hardest times of their journey in life, moments of loss or tragedy. And I have often stayed in touch with a lot of the individuals who have trusted me to tell their stories. And I've really seen them go through quite a transformational journey. So the moment I meet them, they're often going through something quite hard. And then when I've reconnected with them, it's like being a new waypoint on the journey. And so I really just wanted to get them on to the podcast as guests to say, this is their story when I documented it. This is where they are now and where they're going. And I just think it's really inspiring to kind of go behind the headlines. So often we only see a moment in someone's life, but you don't get to see the whole kind of arc of their life. And often people ask me when I do workshops or talks, they see a photograph and it might be a photograph of someone I took 10 years ago and they go, where are they now? So that's kind of the inspiration behind this, of the people I have stayed in touch with, to say this is where they are now and look how far they've come. It's just very powerful. And I also think in journalism, people are very curious to kind of understand how you tell a story and how do you connect with people. So I wanted to kind of go behind the scenes really and to lift the veil up on how I operate as a journalist. And what's wonderful to connect with people that you've told their story is get to hear what their experience is of me telling their story. How did it feel to them? How did it impact them? And it's just to give a deeper insight into the work of a photojournalist and a filmmaker.
It's really remarkable to have had a career of this length and to be able to have established those relationships, those friendships with so many people from so many different countries in so many different contexts. So often we're hearing such negative stories about the way the media are operating or things being twisted. As you introduced me to each of these characters, and I just reflected, these are people that you've kept up with, or in some cases you haven't seen them for a long time, but you were just able to connect with them on such a deep level. So I just wondered, with your career and with your experience, how did you select these friends and characters for series 1?
It was hard to select, but I thought about the different individuals that had made a personal impact on me. And I thought, well, let's start there. The people I've interviewed have inspired me in such a deep way and touched my life in such a deep way. So that's how I selected them. And it was hard, and there's still many more people I want to interview for the next series. So my guests are such a diverse group of individuals, literally from across the world, and people who have survived being a hostage in a war zone, to a sex trafficking survivor, to someone who is a war refugee. My fixer in India, he's the person who helped me get access to the story. And his amazing story, he was actually born into a brothel, which never would have got told. So it was great to have guests whose stories I've told, but actually being able to have some guests who were people who helped me get the story, who don't normally get to share their journey. So that was really special as well. So I wanted that. When you're a journalist, and Nancy, you are a journalist as well, not only my producer, but as a journalist, it isn't about you working alone. It takes a team of people. When you go in country, you need a translator, you need a fixer to help you gain access to make the story happen. So it's never an individual thing, it's teamwork. And I wanted to honour some of my teammates who've helped me get these incredible stories, and I couldn't have done it without them. So that's also why I wanted them as guests on the podcast.
There are people who you're featuring who literally saved your life, or at least kept you safe, and were just, as you say, that second pair of eyes, or where you needed to get out of danger. I think people will really love those episodes. So the opportunity to have this interview gives us a chance for you to help us understand what you want us as listeners to take away. How do we as listeners engage in these stories? Because it's not just a news story. There's a real arc, real transformative things that happen within each episode. So how would you like us to engage as listeners and become part of the story?
Well, firstly, my guests cover a lot of really important issues that are very relevant. Even some of the stories that I told even 15 years ago are still relevant today. Issues that I've tried to raise awareness at as a journalist. I hope that it gives people insight into trafficking and modern slavery and war. So that's the first thing. But secondly, I really want people to just be inspired that even in tragedy and loss, news is often hard. And people always say there's never any good news. As a person that has had the privilege to witness, I call it as a front row seat as a journalist, I've really seen that hope does weave through many of these stories, not every story. When you do see hope, when you do see a light in the darkness of some of these really difficult situations, it stood out to me. So I really hope that that stands out to the listeners and what ordinary individuals surviving these extraordinary situations. And it's so inspirational. You think, how has someone survived that? How has someone got through escaping out of a war zone or being taken hostage or just going through such a traumatic experience, going through an assault, being sexually assaulted, and how have they survived that? How have they overcome that? So I really hope that listeners will be inspired, but not only that, touched, because I know there'll be many listeners that are maybe going through some challenges themselves, and that they will hear stories of people who they will relate to and will be able to go, wow, if that person has got through that, maybe I can get through that. And I really hope that comes through, because I think people often ask me as a journalist, well, how do you go to these places and tell these stories? Because these are not easy subjects, or why do you choose to go? And I choose to go because of the individuals I get to meet. Humans are pretty amazing people. The way we're built, the way we can survive trauma, the way we can survive really quite horrific things, but yet come out the other side. There's something in that. You know, we live in a world where perfection is projected constantly on social media. Everyone's trying to be this perfect person, socially, emotionally, physically. But we live in quite a broken world, and we're quite broken as human beings. No one is perfect. But there is still beauty in that, and there's still things that we can learn from that. And for me, when I go to tell these stories and I meet people and I have the privilege to walk alongside them when they're going through quite a broken time in their life, their vulnerability, the transparency of that is one of the most inspirational essences of life. That is what life is about. And it's not about perfection. It's about acknowledging that beauty can come from ashes, that there can be purpose coming out of pain. And I think if there's something that all these beautiful guests that are on this series is, I just learnt that so much purpose can come out of nothing in life goes to waste. And that's what's really precious. Even the harder elements in life, even the painful elements can be turned for good. And that's what I really hope comes through to the listeners. And I was blown away doing these interviews in that I heard things that I didn't even know, chatting and reconnecting to everyone. And there's moments where I'm brought to tears. And that's because these people are just quite phenomenal in what they've survived and the transformation they have gone through over the years.
Your work touches on so many crucial issues around injustice and humanitarian issues, and you communicate that hope so amazingly through your stills work and also your filmmaking. And I think people will be really touched by this series. But you've got, 9 guests, and some of the episodes actually spread, didn't they, to 2 parts, because we actually just could not cut them any further, and we really hope you'll enjoy those. I wonder whether this is the moment where we could even introduce the idea of the first character, because going into episode 1, I don't think you realised when you made episode 1, a Kosovan refugee, Illyriana, who you'll meet in programme 1, it couldn't be more apposite now with the images that we're seeing of the war in Ukraine and millions of people displaced, millions of people losing their normality, everything that might give a life dignity. Just tell me a little bit about what we should expect with Illyriana.
Yeah, it's funny when you record something, you don't realise how relevant it will be and the timing of that. Illyriana is incredible, an inspirational woman. She now works for Women, actually in Kosovo, which is an organisation that helped women recover from war. This is a woman that really, again, this was a war close to Europe at the time, because Kosovo wasn't in Europe, but I'd say very relatable to what's happening in Ukraine. And she had to flee with her 2 children, very similar. And she gives such a message of compassion to fellow refugees, because she was a refugee, but also just such hope, because the war in Kosovo wasn't that long ago, and how her life has transformed from her losing everything, having to flee for her life with her children, to now running an organisation helping rebuild lives, which takes generations after a war. People need to hear that full transformative journey right now, in that the difference that you can make by bringing refugees into your own home with what's happening here in the UK, and how just opening your hearts and your homes to refugees, the impact that that can make. And that will not just impact what's happening now in the Ukraine, but it will literally impact generations. And I think that's what comes through Illyriana's story and is very relevant with what's happening.
I love the way at the end of some of your shows, you have given us an opportunity to respond, because some of the people are doing amazing work that does need support. Tell me a bit about that, why you did that.
Well, I think so many people that have been my guests are just doing such incredible work as individuals or the organisations they work for. And I just wanted to highlight that work and for people to get behind it. It's not easy work that they're doing. So I really hope that if you're inspired by the individuals that I'm chatting to and you have a real heart for that issue or that place, I'm making sure that all the contact details are there for you to literally directly have an impact on what they're doing. And I hope as well, by listening to this series, that you learn about places you maybe didn't know about and subjects that you thought, I would like to understand more about that or that conflict or what's happening there. So I hope it also just gives some insights. What's happening maybe on issues that are not overly reported at this current time.
Well, you're introducing us to some really inspiring characters, 9 guests to start, and hopefully series 2 will bring even more guests. The great thing about Beyond the Story is, I think, even if you're not familiar with the historical setup of these countries, and perhaps you need to kind of go and look up where a particular guest comes from, the stories transcend their geographical place and even the kind of conflicts that they're part of. You really bring out the humanity and the hope in each of the characters. So I, for one, am really looking forward to this series and hope you'll make a second series.
So do I, because I've got many guests that I would like to invite for that next series, some more individuals that are inspiring. And it's been a really lovely journey to reconnect with people that I work so closely with. Some of these guests I first met over 20 years ago. So it's really special to be able to re-interview, to hear what it was like for them to have their story told by a journalist and for their story to go public. That's really brave and courageous to be willing to tell a story about something that impacted your life in such a difficult way, a traumatic way. I'd say is one of the most courageous things that anyone can do. I'm grateful to them. So Beyond the Story really is to honour all the incredible individuals I've got to work with. I just really hope it inspires the listeners. So I'm so excited just to see how people respond. I want to hear back from everyone. I'd love to learn what people have liked, what people have disliked, what people found interesting. And if there's anyone or any work that you hear about on this series that you want to get behind, just get in touch and we can send you more information.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hazel. All the details about the podcast are in the details below. And maybe we'll check back in partway through the series and have a bit of a catch up again, Hazel, and find out the kind of response that you're getting. But thank you so much for talking to us.
You've been listening to me, Hazel Thompson, on Beyond the Story. And if you've liked what you've heard, do help fund the production of further episodes by giving to Beyond the Story's GoFundMe page. To make sure you never miss an episode, you can click follow on Apple, Spotify, or whatever platform you're using. And please do share the link with your friends. Thank you for joining me on this journey and hearing the first-hand experiences of ordinary people surviving the extraordinary. and the transformational power of hope in not only surviving, but thriving beyond the story. Special thanks to my incredible team, executive producer Nancy Fraser, assistant producer Ella Kachani. The audio is produced by Drew Hawley at Lab Studios, and the music is by George Holliday.